Hi, everyone. Harry here to talk about Trump and the federal government's upping the ante and bringing in more firepower to the District of Columbia. So we had been seeing over the weekend pictures of officers out in fairly well-traveled areas of D.C., where a lot of people are, and we've heard of a couple hundred arrests. And recall, the whole idea here under the Home Rule Act or any form of these powers, short of the Insurrection Act, would be to just come in very briefly, help the state or locality kind of right the ship if things are a little out of control. They're not even out of control in the first place. The whole thing is malarkey. So that makes it, doubly incongruent that they're sticking around and upping the actual dedication of troops. But the White House has announced that the number of National Guard troops patrolling D.C. is going to more than double. They put out a request for, you could call it a command, but we know at least one state has said no thank you, so let's call it a request. And 4 different states have stepped up and said, we'll send our National Guards there to aid in the takeover of the city. And another really serious escalation of force, even though the initial orders had the National Guard not being armed. Now they say, well, maybe we are going to arm them and are just, kind of forgetting the previous guarantee or provision that they wouldn't be doing it. So they started with about 800. It's all the DC National Guard. Now they're going to get, it looks like another several hundred. One of the states that are sending people there say crime is out of control there, and it's clear something must be done to combat it. In other words, the same canard that Trump is doing. So the Republican governor of Mississippi is all in, saying, there's an emergency. That's what it has to be. And it's just a total phantom emergency. Crime, of course, is down significantly and falling still this year. And it's just a complete pretext. Moreover, it now seems to be focused on some very prominent kind of squares and monuments in Washington. In other words, there seems to be a kind of maximum visibility and a really driving home to the country that the nation's capital has been basically taken over. It's given that the district officials are all saying, we don't want it, stay out of here. And in fact, they're going to be going to court in the next couple days. The whole picture looks very much like an occupying force coming into the city. Now you have one of the governors who were asked, the Vermont governor, Republican, who said, public safety is a legitimate concern in cities across the country. Trump has made it seem like DC is a special case and all the other cases are the blue cities, just a complete omission of cities in red states that have, in some instances, the highest rates of violent crime. But he says, in the absence of an immediate emergency or disaster that local and regional first responders are unable to handle, the governor just doesn't support utilizing the Guard for this purpose. And that is really not just commonsensical, but consistent with the law. You have Trump having made a finding of some kind of emergency that is totally bogus on the facts. But then what they're doing is just, they're not exactly treating it as an emergency. They just totally increased the presence on the street. It had been Metropolitan Police Department, which is trained in, policing the community, knowing how to handle stuff. And now we have this complete infusion of National Guard and federal law enforcement agents like the FBI walking the beat. So giving very much the impression that Washington, the nation's capital, is an occupied city. There's indications that they're especially focusing on delivery persons who, on bikes or motorized bikes. Now, of course, that's not a reason to stop anyone, but I don't think that's deterring them at all. My current Substack talks about the legal infirmities, but even more what's going on the ground, where nobody seems to have told them how to comply with the Fourth Amendment, and they are simply stopping people without individualized suspicion. That's just a violation of the Fourth Amendment. They also have been in really low crime but highly visible areas like the National Mall and Lincoln Memorial and Union Station, the big railroad station there. And it's, again, inconsistent with the idea that there's an emergency that has to be quelled, and very consistent with the idea that they want to really flex their muscles and throw their weight around. So in every way, this is sort of off base and harrowing. The whole start, there's no emergency. They don't have the approval, as is typically the case in the way it's supposed to be, in order to come in. They're coming in and basically policing a lot of low crime but high visibility areas, flexing their muscles the way invading armies do, the way the Nazis did in rushing into France, etc., changing the whole character of the city, which again is the nation's capital. So that's changing the character of the nation. They seem to be more than in isolated fashion violating the Fourth Amendment, stopping people without individualized suspicion. So in operation, it's a debacle and a catastrophe. Legally, it remains suspect, but that's going to go to court this week. And then there's just another way, I think, that we have to mark it, which is just kind of, in the nation's psyche. It's really scarring if you live there, and just if you live anywhere in the country, to think that a very aggressive federal force is coming in and basically making a lot of trouble and just changing the whole character of Washington, D.C. And that's the actual reason for it. A continual showing at the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial. Who's in charge? Donald Trump's in charge, and he's going to stay in charge and go to Congress to try to get a resolution, etc. So it is just completely out of keeping with what everything is supposed to be here. And the bottom line is something that will be unforgettable. The closest thing to occupied nation's capital in a couple hundred years. And it's just getting worse. But notice the people who are now showing up to add to the troops are very much on the political side of the plan of saying Washington, D.C. out of control. And Trump, of course, says in the same breath, Chicago out of control, L.A. out of control. So it's no problem for these Republican governors. We'll send our troops in too, and we'll be all in this, what is basically a theater performance to make it look like a predominantly Democratic city is some kind of dystopian hellscape that he's got to take permanent control of. Not the United States of America in the way we always think of the United States of America. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.